I'm so excited for Captivate the Crowd Community Night to have the fabulous and amazing Caterina Rando with us,
Yes.
Scott Speaker of the Year. I'm so proud of that because I got to be a tiny part of that. Thanks for everybody for being here. I'm so excited. I know there's going to be more people popping on. So I'm going to do a quick intro in case you don't know Caterina Rando, and then we're going to do interview style. But feel free, we can ask questions later on. But we both love podcasting. She has had her podcast for a few years. She is an amazing mentor, speaker, fabulous retreat lady, and podcaster. And so we're going to be sharing some of the amazing things that have come out of podcasting. And Caterina, I'm just so excited that you are able to carve out your busy. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about the podcasting cruise next year. So, yay, Caterina! Let's give her a warm welcome, everybody. Woo!
Woo! Thanks, my friends. Bing, bing. Blessing to
Bing,
be
bing,
with all of
bing.
you. I know
Yay!
most of you, and I'm happy to meet those of you I don't already know.
I could go on and on about podcasting, but I want to know about you. Why did you start your podcast? What was the motivation or inspiration behind that?
I remember way back when websites first came out, and it was
Right.
okay, if you're going to be in business, you got to have a website. And then when people started to podcast, and of course, I'm a speaker and I like to blah, 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 and I like to share my massive value. I thought this is, and I really, even though I've written books and everything, I prefer speaking to writing. So I was like, I want to pursue my blog because I want to bliss in my business. I want to do what I love to do. And so that's where speaking came in. And also because I like to showcase other experts that I think are awesome. And podcasting allows you to do that. So that's why I got started. And I really find that it's really great for building influence with people once they know you and then they become your clients. It like helps build massive influence with them while you're not involved. They're listening to you on their own. I would say it hasn't brought me new clients that didn't know I existed. Oh, I just found it on Spotify or whatever. But it's definitely been really great for building influence with people that meet me. And then before they come to a workshop or before they talk to me, they listen to 25 podcast episodes. And now they think you're awesome because they've been getting so much value. The other thing, which I love, is I love to interview people that I want to get to know better. And I do a lot of podcast swapping with other people that have podcasts for my same audience. And that's really worked great. And I've gotten a couple of really phenomenal big time clients from podcasting when they're the host. And so also one of the things you can do is swap with people that you want them to be your clients. In my case, it happened a little more organically. It wasn't necessarily that I was like targeting that person to be my client, but you vibe with someone, they vibe with you, you have a nice conversation, and they say, hey, would you like to talk about the possibility of working together? And that works really well too. I'm all about speaking, networking, and referrals are your fastest paths to your next new clients. So
Right.
I wouldn't put podcasting in, hey, if you podcast, you're going to get a ton of clients. I definitely would say it's one of the top things for building influence and for staying in front of people and for creating visibility and for expanding your network. And also it's a credibility builder. Like I started by saying everybody had to get a website. The same thing. If you're an expert and you're not having a podcast, then it's not having a book. Like those are two things that say you're the expert. You have a book, you have a podcast. Now you're clearly an expert in your space.
I love that. And Caterina's been my mentor since early COVID, so 2020. And sometimes I'll say, oh, this person really loved me and we had a great conversation. And then they saw me speak, but they're not quite ready to do X, Y, Z. And then Caterina will say, Lane, you just need to keep building more influence with them. And that's how it happened when I first met Caterina. I first thought, who is this woman? Bing. It was early COVID and we were all like, ah, what's that? And I knew she was a good speaker, but I didn't know her and it was Zoom. And then every person I connected with the next couple weeks was like, people. So that's social proof. But in case you don't have a whole army of people loving on you that happen to be meeting your latest prospect, another great way is to say, oh, you meet somebody and they say, oh, I really want to work on my speaking. You can say, oh, go listen to my podcast episode number 29 on blah, 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 blah. And so it's a way to build your credibility and build your influence without you talking right at a person, because sometimes they can be more receptive if they're listening at another time or whatever.
And by the way, let me say this, Elaine, because I'm all about inviting people to your workshops and hosting your next workshop. But the thing is, sometimes your topic right now is not what they're looking for. Like right now, if somebody said, Caterina, I want help getting booked, I'm going to say, listen to my podcast, because my next workshop is on how to have your best year ever, or it's on sales or something. So podcast is your endless flow of content.
Yes, I love that. I have no problem with content. I love to talk. I'm a talker. I love connecting. And one of my favorite things to do, especially if I'm super busy, is I will just send a podcast episode that either I've recorded or I was a guest on somebody else's thing, whatever, and I'll say to my team, chop this up for social media. And so there, you've got a lot of really great stuff that you can use over and over again. And so it's like a no-brainer. Also, one of the things I love is it's a great way. That's how you said you got some really big clients. You weren't necessarily targeting these people, but they were in alignment with your umbrella of what you do, or maybe you served similar clients, and then they get to know you, you get to know them. Sometimes you have a pre-conversation, sometimes you're just having a really good connected conversation, and then they're like, oh my gosh, I need what this person has. How do I work with you? That's happened as a guest and as a host for me. Is there anything else you want to say regarding that?
So one of the things we talk about with speaking is we talk about being a great speaker partner, promoting the speech and the place, and being easy to work with, not being a high maintenance speaker. The same thing goes for being a podcast guest. Be the podcast guest that as soon as you get booked, you send your bio, you send your photo. Be the podcast guest that keeps the agreement to show up at that certain time and you don't need to reschedule 5 times. Be the podcast guest that is ready, on time, alert, awake, alive, enthusiastic. Be a great guest. And we wear your cape. Cape stands for certainty, authenticity, positivity, and enthusiasm. There is nothing worse, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Elaine, and those of you that have, there's nothing worse than a schlumpadinka guest.
Oh my gosh. Or a schlumpadinka host. Oh my
Well,
God.
there's that too, right? And they have no energy. And like you're talking to them and they're talking to you like as if they were a depresso on the couch. So to bring that extra vitality, to come with a couple of vignettes and client examples. And I have my Caterina isms, your sayings that you like to say, all ready to go, so that the host feels, wow, this was a great interview. And that's going to give them, they're going to be extra exuberant about your podcast, which means it's probably going to get more attention. They might be mentioning it. And then when other people say to them, who did you have that was good? They're going to recommend you to other podcasters rather than the opposite. I loved her book, but I remember once I used to have this interview series. This is pre-podcast and pre-everything. We had this CD things, and I had this friend, she'd written like 5 books, and she was a prolific author. And I interviewed her for my interview series. My friend, she had 75 speech fillers in 20 minutes. My brother-in-law at the time was my editor, and he was so mad at me because I said, take all those out. He was really upset. So also paying attention, of course, to being the kind of good speaker that you are. And because the more excited your host is about being with you, the more easy you make their job, the more they are going to be loud and proud about you, recommend you, and of course, have you back on their podcast.
Yes, I love that. And like, it's for me, it's late in the day, it's 5 p.m. I've been Zooming and coaching all morning and all afternoon. So I'm standing up. And Caterina stands up when she speaks because it gives me energy. And and notice she did not say you have to have a perfect story, but you want to have energy. So it's okay if you flub a word. It's not about being
Yes.
perfect, but you want to just bring your energy. Sometimes I get excited. So sometimes I write a little note. Oh, I want to make sure I mention this. Or sometimes if I've been speaking a lot, I had 4 gigs in 4 states one time. By the fourth one, I was like, wait, right? But oh, I want to make sure I tell this story. So I'll write down this client, and then it just grounds me. But there's nothing wrong with going, let me just check for a second. And it's not about being perfect, but it's about bringing your energy, your heart, your why did you start your business? Why are you passionate about who you help and what makes you uniquely qualified? It's not about being perfect, but you want to bring the energy, and you want to be like, when you are talking to a host, you want to be, how can I help you? How can I help you grow not just this episode, but your podcast? Who do you want to meet? Instead of coming from, as a comedian, people are always like, how can I get on your stage? And come support the show first. So when you come with that attitude of, hey, let's make this the best episode ever, and I'm going to help promote it. And what else do you need? Oh my gosh, that's going to be so refreshing, because unfortunately, a lot of people do not have that attitude.
And that's all about being a good podcast guest or a good speaker partner, is doing what you said you're going to do. Hey, we're going to promote it. We're going to put it in on our list. We're going to put it in these other groups. That, and do what you said you're going to do. And don't do it like later. Do it when they say, hey, we're going to drop on Friday. You already got on your calendar, as soon as you get that link, that you're going to be doing what you said you're going to do. Keeping your agreements, that's what makes you a great speaker partner and a great podcast partner. And the other thing is, go the extra mile. What else can you do for that podcast host that they weren't expecting? And one of the things is always ask, hey, what other guests are you looking for? What other topics? Because the easier you make it for that podcast host or that speaker booker to
Mm-hmm.
fill their roster, the more they're going to bliss. I remember during the pandemic, this fabulous former client of mine, she had this all day Galentine's event, like Women Empowerment Day for women, virtual. And she said to me, she booked me to talk. I got to be the keynote. And then I said, hey, my friend, what other topics are you looking for? And she had, like, her whole speaker roster was people I had recommended except for one gal. And it's like, I made her job so easy. So of course she's going to come back to me next time to be a guest, to be a speaker when she needs something. And that's great, because you know what I got to do? I got to recommend all my VIP clients. And guess what? That makes me look good with my VIP clients too. So
It's
really,
like a win.
exactly. So be focused on being a great speaker and a great podcast guest partner whenever you have a booking.
Yeah, I love that. And if you're someone who is an introvert, you might be shaking in your shoes right now. However, you can practice your stories. You can give your host, hey, these are some questions that I would like you to ask to get me into my practice stories. Or you can even tell your host, every once in a while, I get nervous and I may need you to jump in and remind me where I was. Partner with them, because we all want it to be good. I didn't say perfect, but good. And so if you're an introvert, that's a great way to set yourself up to feel like, okay, I can do this. I'm not doing stand up in front of 500 people naked. I'm just a one-on-one conversation. It can feel naked, right? And then if you're an extrovert, sometimes we get excited and we go off. So you can be like, you know what? I'm sorry. I went way off on that tangent. What was the question you asked me? Or let me come back and answer the question you actually asked me. You can just acknowledge, you know what? Sorry, I got excited. I'm on my soapbox. I'll reel it back in. Again, it's being aware of what's happening in the room, so to speak.
Also say, Elaine, that's the beauty of the spoken word as opposed to the written word. Because with the spoken word, you can take a sidebar. Sometimes I say I'm taking a sidebar to my sidebar, and that's fine, because you can go all over wherever the conversation leads you, which is way different than the written word, which you have to stay on topic and follow.
Right.
So, and that's, and it's not just about the content. It is about the delivery, your energy, your enthusiasm, your bliss. These are all alluring to the listener. You could be saying the most profound thing, but if you're saying it with no energy, the listener's mind is going to wander, which is why
Right.
Zoom room, we have to bring extra energy in a Zoom room to hold the
Right.
attention of the people that are here.
Yes. And good point. And I want to also mention I had a podcast a couple of years ago at the beginning of COVID, and I had producers. They built a studio in Brooklyn. It was very fancy. We had a blast, and it was expensive. And I don't regret 1 minute of it. After a certain point, I was, you know what? I already have some expensive hobbies, just a joke. But anyway, so I put that on the shelf, and it's still really great, still human. You can all go check it out. It's like we talk off the ledge. We gave a lot of coaching and we laughed a lot. And then I realized I needed to be more specific with my positioning. My point is, I'm also doing it with a super amazing woman, Julie Marty Pearson, who
Hey,
is our
Julie, bing,
fabulous,
bing, 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 bing.
fabulous, amazing host. And she has taught me a lot about some of the things because I have a different budget now. I don't have a partner, it's me, but she has been so amazing with her coaching and her guidance. The other day I was, okay, how do I do this? And there's some things that are clear, but when you're in the middle of it, you're like, I don't know how to do this. And she's just been amazing. So if you're thinking about launching your own podcast, which we all highly recommend, and you can do it on all kinds of different budgets. You can do it. There's lots of different ways. You don't have to do it every week. There's lots of different ways. So if you're even thinking about it, I highly recommend reaching out to Julie Marty Pearson. I do think it's really good for us to bring up what is happening in April. I am so
Okay, good.
excited, even though it's
Okay.
original.
Yeah, well, let
Hey,
me also say I have the privilege, thanks to you, Elaine. I have the privilege of having Julie on my team. In April, though, Julie's coming as a participant, really a participant expert on our Amp Up adventure for women speakers, podcasters, and business leaders. And this idea came from a couple, I guess it was last year now. I took 10 gals on a cruise for a cruise on how to do women's retreats. It was a retreat on how to do retreats. And I had all this content, how to plan, how to produce, how to do the money part, all this awesome content. And one day I said to the gals, okay, my friends, after the morning session, we're going to go to lunch. And after lunch, we are going to mastermind in my suite. Because I always get a suite when I have a group, mastermind in our suite. And then we're going to go to dinner at 6 o'clock. So we get there about 2 o'clock. We're going to do some masterminding. 7.5 hours later, the gals are still blah blahing. We didn't go to dinner. They wanted to share resources, ideas, ask each other's opinions. And then at the end, when I surveyed them, what part did you like the best? Did you like this special activity I put together, or this special activity, or these very important discussions with my templates and my extensive handouts? And they said, we like the masterminding the best. And so that said to me, okay, that there's something here. So that's why we're doing the Amp Up adventure. It's going to be women that are already speaking, podcasting, already, of course, in business, and gals that want to start to do podcasting and want to do more speaking and we all, of course, want to be better business women. And we're going to get on the ship together, and we're going to have different round tables where you can pick what hot topics you want to go participate in. And we will do that during certain sessions on the ship. And then, of course, we'll get off the ship and enjoy each other on the ports. We'll have those of you that have not been on a ship with me before, we will have accelerated jewelry exchange. We will have afternoon tea with fascinators provided. We will do some girly stuff because we do. And guess what? This is a business expense, and your business will be super uplifted. Your cup will be full, and you'll make great connections. One of the great things about a ship, as Elaine, because you've been with me on a ship before, Julie's coming with me next week. It's going to be her first cruise ever. Bing, bing. One of the things about being on a ship is nobody can come late, nobody can leave early. So everybody's stuck together, and that's great for community building and making friends. So that's next April 27th through May 4th. Some of the gals here are already registered, and we would love to have you all join us, Julie, Elaine, and myself, and some other great, amazing gals.
I love that, Caterina. And I want to piggyback on that. Yes, please come. It's going to be fun and life changing and business changing. One of the things I learned from doing comedy is when you are the host of anything, you get to set the tone. And so it's your party.
Right.
And one of the things I learned when I was, because open mics are when anybody can come sign up and practice their comedy, and I use that term loosely. I want it to be kind and supportive. So you can't talk when somebody else is going on, there's no heckling. And I made sure everybody got clapped up, and I set a positive tone because I wanted it to be more of a workshop instead of an open mic for crazy people in New York City. And so that became my reputation. And then my comedy buddy, she was so good at it. We had headliners coming in and begging to get on her open mic. My
Wow.
point being, my point being is you get to do this for your podcast. You can be, especially if you maybe you have two guests on, you can always say you get to curate it. So that's one thing I've learned a lot from Caterina. She curates, and she only invites, she's just not going to invite, as she
No
calls it,
clunkalingus,
schlumpadinkas,
no
or I
slumpiness,
call
no
them, yeah,
clunkalingus,
no
right.
schlumpadinkas, but nobody who's going to be a wet blanket and be like, And so you can say that. You can be a host and create your own vibe, and that's part of your brand. And another reason I talk about video, right? I love teaching video because we make one piece of content and then we put it all these places.
Right.
Same for podcasting. You make one episode and then you can put it out and put it out and share it and email about it and post it on LinkedIn and put it on YouTube. You can chop it up. You know, that thing has legs. Just like, when do you stop marketing a book? Never.
Right.
And so I just think
Well,
it's such a great thing. Good.
after you have your next book, then you chill on marketing the first one, because
Right.
your business always needs something new and exciting. My friend, I do want to piggyback on what you said. So for our pod, when we have our business, we think about, okay, who's our ideal client and what's my brand? Like, we think about those things. And of course, I want to make sure that you're doing that for your podcast too. Of course, your audience is your ideal clients, but think about how you want to present yourself and what you want the overall brand and culture, I'm going to use that word, of your podcast. Okay. So my intention is, of course, it's massive value and education. Every time someone is listening to my podcast, my intention is that they leave that episode more uplifted than before it started. Yes, I'm going to give them some super tips and some value, but I'm also going to tell them, hey, you have massive value to bring. There's a lifetime supply of people to serve. Go be loud and proud, share your massive value. It's my intention to remind them of some uplifting thoughts and messages as well on every single episode. My podcast is for women who have businesses, and I want to educate them and inspire them. I don't want them to ever leave more depresso than when they showed up. It's not a true crime podcast, right? It's a uplift your business podcast. Okay. So think about the tone, and then that informs the type of guests you want to have. Because sometimes people are very smart, but they're very dry. Those are not the guests that you want to have. Every time, if you're thinking, okay, I want you to think, what would Elaine do when you're thinking about booking someone? What would Elaine do? Because Elaine has so much positive energy that you say, okay, does she meet the Elaine criteria? Okay, of positivity, right? And uplift. Then you can book them. But if they're not meeting the Elaine criteria, then pass on that. And because of course, there's a lifetime supply of great people to have on your podcast. I like it when I already know the person before I invite them to my podcast. I've spent some time with them. If maybe I didn't really know them, like maybe Lane recommends them or something, then I'm gonna go to their workshop. I want to get a feel for them, because just because they have a fancy website doesn't mean they're going to be a great interview. And if they have their own podcast, listen to a couple episodes. I know it's kind of
Yes.
hard to consume tons of episodes, but that will help you to have rapport with that person when you get on, it's time for the podcast.
Such a great lesson. Yes. So one of the things, my first podcast, we didn't think about positioning. We were like, it'll be fun. We'll figure it out, which is like fun for improv. Learn from my mistakes, people. We'd say, oh, I met the coolest person. Oh, let's interview her. Before we checked out any of her platforms, what she was really about, because I love people and I'm very curious and I do love stories. I teach stories. I love stories. And so I would just be like, oh, I met this fabulous woman. Sure. And that's not, you want to practice discernment. And it's
Yes.
also okay to be, you know what, if Mary comes up to you and says, I really want to be on your podcast, it's okay to very tactfully say, Mary, I would love to have you. Let's work on some of your stories. Or why don't you practice on somebody else's, or in a tactful way, you can say, let's talk about it in 3 to 6 months and see how you do. Because you want to protect it.
So my friend, let's talk about a little bit about that. Like we've talked about the guest criteria of they meet the Elaine vitality quotient, but also think about, because that is important, right? They have positive energy. Okay, but also think about, is there any other criteria? Of course, they have to have the same ideal clients as you, and it has to be something that I'm going to call it under your umbrella. Okay. If somebody wants to talk about health and wellness, we would have to tie that into health and wellness for women in business. Okay. So whatever it is, if somebody wants to talk about your credit score, okay, that's a tie in for women in business. So make sure that you don't just think she's a cool person, that it matches your umbrella of whatever it is for your business. So that's really important. But also, you may want to have other criteria. I got about 80 clients right now. I cannot have them all on my podcast. Okay. So I have to say, okay, when you've been a client for 3 years, or when you're doing this program, because everyone's going to ask you to be on your podcast. And then when people that are not my clients ask, I say, I do podcast swapping. So if they don't have a podcast, now these days I'm doing half Caterina episodes and half interviews. And after 150 episodes, I decided we're going to do it twice a month, not 4 times a month. Okay. And that's because I already got 150 episodes. I don't need to add another 50 this year. And also, that's less work for me and my team. That's less money. So that means I've only got 12 interview spots a year. So
Okay.
by having a criteria, that helps me with my decision making. And then when I say to Mary Jane and Sheila, I'm sorry, I can't have you on my podcast, and I tell them why, because I have this many spots for my VIP clients and this many spots for swapping. Okay. Is everybody with me on this? Because you will
That's so great.
yeah, everybody will ask you to be on your podcast. And Elaine, you're like me, like we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. How do you say no without making it personal to them? And that's something that I've done, which I think is very helpful.
Yes. And it's always okay. I did a summit a couple of years ago where Caterina was one of the best speakers, of course. And I had all these people come out of the woodwork. I want to be on your next summit. I want to be on your next summit. People I didn't know. And I felt so torn. So, anyway, it's a good problem to have. And I think it's great practice because as you grow in your business and your influence, you will have more people who want more things from you and of you. So, it's always great to have criteria and you get to practice your boundaries. And you can always say, let me get back to you. I need to check my calendar. If you're a people pleaser, recovering people pleaser, it's always okay to say, you know what? Let me check with my assistant. Julie's really tough. I'm going to have to get it through to her first. It's been a great lesson for me. So we've talked about,
So the same thing that we've just discussed for podcasting, the same thing for speaking. Say, Elaine has had me on her stage, so I do stage swaps. So if they,
right.
rather than just, okay, if you have your event, I would love to do a stage swap with you. You can ask for that. Hey, I'm going to have people that are sponsors. I've got 10 spots for sponsors. Would you like to be a sponsor? It's only going to be $100 if they're not willing or whatever. So that's another thing, is to have some sponsored spots too. This is if you're having live events. this is another consideration. But stage swapping is definitely something. And then, of course, application. I'm the speaker booker for my polka dot chapter, and Julie's helping me with this. And so I said, November, fill out your application by October 30th, which is, or I guess the 31st, which is tomorrow. And we we reminded everybody. Okay. But then guess what? After tomorrow, if they didn't turn in their application, oh, sorry, you didn't. So again, it's not making it personal. You create this criteria, because what we don't want to say is, we don't want to say, sweetheart, you're not a good enough speaker, or sweetheart, you're not a good enough, far enough along, or you don't have enough followers. Because you know what? When they're at the top, they're going to remember that. So
They will.
that's why we have criteria, because it supports us in graciously declining without making it personal to the person.
I love that. Graciously declining without making it personal. That is a business lesson I get to have almost weekly, probably. So, such a great point. So many good points, Caterina. So many good points. Can I ask you, do you plan your episode when you first started out? If somebody's new at it, do you really think about it? Or do you think, okay, this is a theme I'm seeing? Or do you really go over this with Angela about, okay, I want to work on this topic and this topic?
So what informs my podcast is more, are they under my umbrella? It would be of interest to women in business. And then
Right.
I'm looking for great guests, meaning, like I said, like they have positive energy and vitality, and they're really going to bring it, and hot topics. That's what I'm looking for. Now, I am not a big researcher. I do not research what are the top 10 topics. I do not do pre-interviews because I
Yeah,
don't have,
that's a lot of work.
okay,
Right.
lose the pre-interviews. Are you kidding me? Okay. I have on the application, it says, are there some questions you'd like Caterina to ask? I follow that, or I don't follow that. That's if the guest are Pompadinka, then I have to go over there, but use what they sent me. But normally the conversation flows, and you have familiarized yourself with the guest. You've listened, you've looked at their site, you've listened to them, what they're doing, their podcasts or their workshops, so that you put together a few questions to get you started, but then hopefully the conversation flows.
I love that.
I do. That's what I do. I'll call it grab and go podcasting, as
Grab
opposed
and go. I love that.
to painstakingly preparation for a
Well, and
podcast.
then, and so when you do your solos, is it just what's in your heart for the
Yeah.
day?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay. I love that.
I
Or
do
like,
make,
I'm seeing this
I,
theme this week.
yeah, I do make an outline, Elaine. This is what I do, what I call my must make points. So,
Ah,
I'm going to talk about how to get booked for speaking. I'm going to say, okay, here's some must make points. And then, yes, I go with it. But again, that's because it's not my first rodeo. I've been talking
right.
topics for
For a
many
long
years,
time.
and I'm always
Okay.
stories to include. Stories are really great, and how to make it more uplifting.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. I want to just add one more thing and then we're going to open it up to questions. So I got trained as a Debbie Ford coach. She worked with Deepak Chopra. She was on Oprah, and I was flying to San Diego all the time. And I have 3 of her certifications, and I got to be on a Hay House radio spot with her a gazillion years ago. And I was nervous. Oh. And I remember she said, I'm going to make you great. So just breathe. And it really helped. And she said that to me, and it really helped me. And so that is the intention I always set with any host or interviewer is I want to make you great.
Mhm.
And because when people feel like you're making them great, they have a tendency to give their greatest.
That's
And it's
beautiful.
like emceeing. I used to tell the audience, you're so important because if you focus and pay attention and laugh, we get funnier. It's a,
I love
it's
that.
a two-way street. Take that and run with it, everybody. All right, so let's open it up to some questions. Anybody have questions?
Got a
Yes,
question.
Ellen.
Okay, I'm new to podcasting, and my first couple of guests I've selected from our community. And that is because one, they're already admins in my community. So they're already active. I already know them. I know their backstory. We did draft some questions, like 10, just to get the conversation flowing. And I've shared that with everybody. I'm recording my first one Monday. I'm so excited. And so here's my question. I'm starting with people from the community. I have influencers that I'm going to interview and that have already committed to working with me to be interviewed, but I got to figure my stuff out first. So I don't want my first guests to be my influencers that have already committed. I would I'm in the sober space, so I've got a lot of sober influencers just to bridge the gap there. So I want to start with my membership, which also great sober tenure, but they're not like polished speakers. I think it's great just for me to test my chops and see how I'm going to be with the communication and the flow of the conversation.
Absolutely. I'm like spot on, girl. I'll tell you, I'm just relaunched this podcast, and most of the people are clients and friends and dear people I've known for years. And I interviewed one woman who I met at a speaking thing in Dallas who's an influencer. And I sounded like a valley girl. I was like, ah, I was fawning. I was so excited. And maybe no one else is going to notice, I hope and pray. But I was, wow, Elaine, just notice. I felt a little in awe of her. So I relapsed into my, and I give myself grace. I'm still going to drop it. And I'm so glad I noticed that. And I'm so glad I did the others first. And going forward, how can I help myself not turn into that fawning fangirl quite so much, to hold my own? And Caterina, what would you say to that?
Yeah,
Because you're always so powerful.
You're so sweet, my friend. Thank you. Here's the thing. Your first few podcast episodes, just like your first few speeches and workshops, are not going to be the best ones. However, that does not mean that they're not going to be massive value. Okay. And we're getting better. And so, yes, Ellen, if you're going to have your big time person who you respect and admire, don't do them in podcast 1, 2, 3. Wait till you've had more experience yourself as a podcast host, because then you're going to be more relaxed and you're more into the zone by the time you do that. So definitely I would say the first 6 episodes, so start with your friends that like Elaine. You're going to have a great time with Elaine and it's not going to be uncomfortable or intimidating. So bing, bing, do that. People, and that's where the swapping comes in too. Hey, let's swap. I'll interview you. And here's the other thing. You don't have to drop your podcasts in the order that you recorded them. Okay.
That was going to be my next question. Yes.
No,
Okay.
Ding, ding,
and that's why we like to have
ding,
a lot,
ding, 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 ding.
have a lot in the can. And also, by the way, I told you we got over 150 episodes. So right now we're getting ready for our Fempire event in a couple weeks. So we're redropping a couple of our episodes in this month and last month about build your Fempire. Okay. So that's another thing to be aware of, is that if it dropped last year or dropped the year before, and this is why you always make evergreen content, then you can drop it again to support whatever matches that you're selling or filling that you like. If getting ready for Amp Up, we'll probably drop again on the power of women's retreats. We'll probably drop that one again to talk more. And then I can put a new little thing at the end talking about Amp Up. So, and let me back up, Elaine, and say, so my friends, make sure that your content is evergreen for your podcasts. Okay. You're not going to talk about, hey, I'm getting ready for my event next week, and do you want to join me? And da da da. You say, hey, by the way, we host a lot of events. Go to our website, take a look, but make sure your content is evergreen. So nobody feels like it's old stuff when they listen to it 6 months or a year from now.
So many great points. And I'll just also say, I listen to podcasts all the time because I just think errands are more fun and I'm a story addict, right? And so sometimes I listen to stuff you missed in history class, and they will say, hey, if you're listening to this, don't listen to any of the emails that might be defunct. Here's the most current, blah, blah, blah. They'll button it. They'll put that at the beginning or the end. Now, obviously, if you're just starting out, you don't have to worry about that. It's imperfect, right? I think of it as a net. Like when I would teach going live, you say, hey, if you're just welcoming, if it's your first time here, so happy that you're here. Hey, if you've been following me for a while, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. And you're like saying, you're greeting all the people. And yeah, I think that's a great idea to start with some what we might call low hanging, comfortable fruit, and then move up so you don't turn into a valley girl like I did.
And recognize the more you do this, the better you get. Just like with speaking, just like with writing. I remember the first time I wrote an article, it was like 500-word article. It took me a week. I had 6 people review it. I think I hired a professional editor. And then and it took me, it went from a week to an hour, because after a while you get really good, you get more masterful, you get more efficient. And it's the same thing with podcasting and speaking and doing videos.
I love that. I love that. And Mark Maron, he was this sort of washed out, never made it comic. And he started doing a podcast in his garage because he just loved interviewing people. And now he's had this huge renaissance. Obviously, it was years in the making. I'll never forget, he said, President Obama just left my garage. It was so exciting to hear the awe in his voice. Speaking of sober, I would love to be on his podcast. I'd love for him to be on yours. But yeah, I was thinking, Julie said, why don't we let's go into breakout rooms for just a second. And because I always think when you can speak it, what are you getting out of this conversation? What is one thing you are taking away from your time here? Are you okay? What is one thing you're going to do? I'm going to reach out and be a guest. I'm going to work on my podcast bio. One thing of action that you're doing. I would love to do that. And then we can come back and wrap up. We're just going to give you a 1 minute each to talk about what is one thing you're going to take and do, or what's your biggest aha and what are you going to do about it? And then we'll come back and share. Yay. All right. Does anybody want to share your big ahas? Anything you're committing to?
I'll share.
Okay, Laura. Yay.
Okay. I know this from Caterina anyway, but it was a good reminder because I'm more interested in being a guest right now. So,
Yeah.
And I have been helping my friend who has a podcast about quality systems and stuff like that, which is what I used to do when I was in corporate. So I am her wingman on the podcast because we're practicing. And so I thought that would be a good way to practice. And it's absolutely right. I don't know which one of you said it. Oh, Caterina said it, that the first ones you do will not be so great, but there was good content. There was good content, but we just were doing the wrong things. But anyway, so it's a learning curve. But my thing is that I took away was that to make the speaker sheet, which I already should have done. But yeah, I need to do that.
We already should have done 2 marathons today. There's always, when you have a business, there's always a gazillion things to do, right? So you're here. That's awesome.
Never gonna get through your to-do list. So yeah.
And I want to say something about the first episodes. So I have 2 podcasts. My first podcast, The Story of My Pet, I started 2.5 years ago, and I was brand new to podcasting at that point. And the first several episodes I didn't edit. There was dogs barking, there was interruptions because I was just
Amazon.
And it doesn't matter. People still listen. And then the evolution of the podcast is you getting better, and you can change your focus. You can change the cover. That's the great thing about podcasts. You don't have to stay with where you start. You can evolve and also do it how you want to. If YouTube is too scary for you, don't worry about it. People are going to listen to the traditional podcast. So I always tell people, you don't have to do it all to start. Start it, do what you can, and learn and grow, and you evolve. Your podcast evolves with you.
Yeah, build the plane as you fly it. I love that. And I just want to pipe onto that. So as a comedian, I was always like, I gotta get a tape. I gotta have a perfect 30-minute tape, that's a lot of pressure. So I started saying, you know what? All I need is one clean joke. We can edit. You can be having like the best conversation and then there's sirens go off or whatever. There's editing. So instead of thinking I have to have this perfect thing, you can think about there's always editing, or you can chop it up. Or if the sound is horrible, you can do a voiceover later. There's a million ways you can use stuff. Anybody else want to share? Anybody want to throw their hat into the...
I was just going to say, I wrote because it was something that all 3 of us mentioned. I'd like to know a little bit more. I'd want you to talk into a little bit about the podcast bio. Like, how is that different? What needs to be in that?
Oh, that's a great question. Caterina, you want to take that?
actually talking about this in our breakout room, because if you're a speaker, you want to have a speaker sheet that positions you to get booked for speaking. That's not the same as your sheet that you might send to podcast hosts to book you as a guest. Now, there might be a lot of stuff that is the same, but your podcast sheet, I'll call it your sheet, Claudia, because it's more than just your bio, is to get you booked for podcasts. So it might say on there, you've been a guest on 100 podcasts or however many you have. You might have testimonials from hosts. And if you don't know where to get one, ask Elaine to give you one, or wherever you like. Here's what I do for testimonials. If Elaine had me on her podcast and she said to me after, Caterina, that was great. We had a great time. You were a great guest. I'm so excited we did this. I'm going to write that up myself. And I'm going to say, hey, Elaine, this is what you said to me when you had me as a guest. Please wordsmith this or approve it. Because when you ask people to write testimonials for you, they want to do a good job. And that usually means it goes to the bottom of their to-do list and they don't get to it. So I write my own testimonials based on our conversation, and that's what I tell them.
Right.
And so you might have 3 of those on your podcast guest sheet. And then you have your bio about your, expertise and experience and credentials. But then you also would say, here's some hot topics for me to talk about that you could interview me on. And then I would also put on there, happy to provide you a list of questions if requested. And so the purpose of it is not to get you clients. It's not to get you speeches. It's to get you booked on podcasts. So it's written, and I usually recommend 1 page, but you might have 2 if you have a ton of credentials and things. Just a PDF that you can upgrade later. And you put of course, your contact information on there. And let me be very clear. Put your phone number on there. Do not just put your email, okay? We are building relationships and people want to call you. Now, some people don't, but for the ones that want to, put your phone number on there and your website and your email and your social links if you have them.
And I was going to say, related to your one sheet, is most podcasts who do guests, they're going to send you a form to fill out, and it's going to ask you for all of this. So if you've already created your one sheet and you have it as a Word and a PDF and you can just copy and paste, they're
Right.
usually going to ask you for your website, your email, social links, bio, topics, headshots. And it varies depending on the podcast, obviously. So if you've already created it to be able to send people when you're asking to be on, you don't have to do any more work. Once they agree to have you, you just fill out the form and send it right back to them. So it helps you in more than one way to have that information ready. And one of the things I tell people about a speaker one sheet versus a podcast one sheet is when you're speaking, you usually have a couple topics, 2 or 3 maybe, that you really love talking about and you're really great at. Podcasting, it may be more like 10, right? It can be very dependent on the podcast you're going on. So even though I help people launch podcasts, I talk a lot about guesting and how to be a good guest and how to get asked back. So maybe that's what I'm talking about. And I'll have a different blurb for when I'm talking about that on a podcast versus talking about launching your own or networking. So it's nice to have pieces of info depending on what you're going to talk about and who the person is that you're sending it to.
I love that. And one thing that I've learned from, this is not my first rodeo either, is I have an everyday folder on my desktop and it has bios. There's my college speaking bio. There's my comedy bio. There's my corporate bio. There's my podcast bio. There's my, and that way it's all right there. And as you're applying to speak and be on other things, everything that you create, always make a copy of it, because that way you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time and you can have versions of it. But I've got my headshots there. I still have to hunt and peck a little bit, but I'm very proud that I finally have that after years and years. That's just great to be, or if you have an assistant, you can go, it's in the everyday file. Go get that. Great question.
I live in Vancouver, Canada, so my podcast is very specific to where I live and what I cover. And I did that intentionally, but I have marketing background. Like I'm a copywriter, right? So I understand that, like how to niche, what I niched on purpose and why I niched it. And the other thing was, there's a lot of great tips, Elaine, that you've given here today. Even though I've done podcasting for a long time, I could probably still use in my own podcast.
That's great because some people who've never been interviewed don't know what to expect. I also have friends who have podcasts that don't have guests and they want to start, but they feel scared about being the interviewer and how to prepare for that. So I think those skills are great to practice no matter your experience. It's always changing, right?
Yeah. And there's always another, as Caterina says, we're always up leveling. I'm so happy everybody came. And Caterina, is there anything else you want to say?
It's really important that we keep our cups full and that we go and do things to fill our cups. And your business is supposed to be your bliss. I think every gal needs a couple of retreats every year where she is getting her cup full, where she's not in charge, where she's connecting with other amazing women. It's really important. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to fill your cup. We're going to make you bliss. And we're going to give you a lot of super tips while having a great time.
Awesome.
I love that. I love that concept of if you're a female leader, isn't it nice to not be the leader sometimes? To not be the one who steps up, because we're the ones who do it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Which is why we're amazing. And why sometimes we're running on empty, or I'm the only one. Just kidding. Oh my gosh, this was so much fun. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Caterina. Woo!
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's awesome.
everybody.
Thanks, Julie.
So
Thanks.
amazing.
Always
Yes,
blessing.
give her some love. Give her some love, everybody. Give everybody some love.